Alan Gross, an American contractor who was imprisoned in Cuba for the past 5 years. Well, there is word now he has been released. He's on a plane right now returning home from Havana. This is part of a deal for his freedom. 3 members of a spy ring known as the Cuban Five are being sent back to Cuba.
Gross was jailed for bringing satellite communications equipment to Cuba as part of a U.S. pro-democracy program. We are also hearing that President Obama is set to announce a major overhaul of the U.S.-Cuba policy. We have complete coverage of this breaking news for you, but let's get first to our global affairs correspondent, Elise Labott. Elise, what do we know?
Well, Chris and Allison, as you said, it is a landmark deal between the U.S. and Cuba. Cuba has released Alan Gross as a humanitarian gesture, his health really failing in the U.S. Naturally, his family very concerned about him. But in addition, the U.S. and Cuba swapping spies. The U.S. releasing those 3 Cuban intelligence agents, part of the so-called Cuban Five. Cuba also releasing a U.S. intelligence asset, been in jail in Cuba for more than 20 years. Administration officials tell me with Gross's humanitarian release and the subsequent spy spot, President Obama is set to announce later today the most sweeping overhaul in U.S. policy towards Cuba since the embargo was imposed in 1961. And the initiatives the president will announce today include a major relaxing of travel restrictions for Americans. That means a general license, if you will, to travel to Cuba for practically anything but tourism, a resumption of banking between U.S. and Cuban banks, an increase in those remittances Americans can send back to their families back home in Cuba. The president will also allow expanded commercial and export sales of goods and services to Cuba. And officials are telling me President Obama will move to restore formal diplomatic ties with Cuba, see about taking Cuba off the state sponsor of terrorism list. Why now? Officials say there have been some modest reforms on the island. They want to encourage that. They stress this is not a reward for the Castro regime, but they say a recognition the embargo is not working, and if the U.S. wants change in Cuba, needs to engage more with the people and the Cuban government. President Obama going to make that announcement later today, and officials stress not letting up on those human rights.